먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Coming up on Arirang News, South Korean President Yoon announces a major reshuffle, replacing all three of his top aides, which includes naming current Director of National Policy, Lee Kwan-seop, as the new presidential chief of staff. During a year-end key party meeting, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un calls on his military to accelerate war preparations. South Korea's intelligence service says it is likely that the North would carry out a military provocation ahead of the South's general election in April. South Korea's overall industrial output rose last month, led by a recovery in semiconductors. Also, retail sales saw their biggest increase in 9 months. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We start with President Yoon replacing all three of his top aides ahead of his third year in office. He appointed current First Vice Foreign Minister Chang Ho-jin as his new National Security Advisor and current Director of National Policy Lee Kwan-seop as his new Chief of Staff. Our presidential correspondent Kim Do-yeon leads us off.
New names for all three of President Yoon Suk-yeol's highest-ranking aides were announced on Thursday. First, the current First Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chang Ho-jin, has been named the new National Security Advisor. He's a career diplomat who also was the ambassador to Russia before his latest position.
Security today extends beyond self-national defense to vital diplomatic relations with allies in other countries. The new National Security Advisor, we believe, is ideally suited to support the president in these crucial areas of diplomacy and security.
The appointment comes as the current National Security Advisor, Cho Tae-yong, is going through the parliamentary hearing process to take the vacant position of National Intelligence Service Chief. Chang said he's looking to continue pushing on from the diplomatic and security strategy of the administration, including strengthening cooperation with the U.S. and the new Indo-Pacific strategy.
In the 30 years since the end of the Cold War, the international order has reached a new phase with emerging geopolitical shifts. Assuming this responsibility during such a transitional period makes me feel an even greater sense of duty.
He also emphasized building on the audacious initiative that President Yoon laid out for his policy towards North Korea and other security issues. The current ambassador to Germany, Kim Hong-gyun, will replace Chang as the first vice minister. Kim is a known expert on North Korean issues with a stint as a special representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs, also known as the top nuclear envoy. In the meantime, the current presidential chief of staff, Kim Dae-gi, announced his resignation, saying President Yoon has named his current Director of National Policy, Lee Kwan-seop, to take the role effective January 1st. The new appointment came less than a month after a reshuffle that created the new Director of National Policy role. Lee was the first one to fill the post. He's a career public servant with known expertise in nuclear energy policy.
People's livelihoods are extremely challenging and macroeconomic risks still remain. I will work diligently. Please continue to encourage, support, and also critique me.
Replacing Lee as the Director of National Policy is an outsider. Sung Tae-yoon, a professor of economics at Yonsei University, has been named. The top office says different economy-related government branches have long been asking for his insights, giving him experience both in theory and practice. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has called on South Korea's frontline soldiers to act first and report later in the event of an enemy provocation, with North Korea continuing to advance its nuclear weapons and missile programs. The South Korean leader on Thursday visited the Republic of Korea Army's 5th Infantry Division to inspect military preparedness at the front line of the heavily militarized inter-Korean border. Commending their sense of duty during the holiday season, Yoon said the South Korean people expect a strong and dependable army and order they respond immediately and resolutely to an enemy provocation under the principle of acting first and reporting later. Also holding a meeting and a luncheon with the soldiers, the commander-in-chief promised to dramatically improve welfare for soldiers. With North Korea's key party meeting underway, the regime's leader Kim Jong-un urges his military to accelerate war preparations. South Korea's intelligence agency meanwhile says the regime will likely ramp up its provocations ahead of the general election in April next year. Our Choi Min-jung has more.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on Wednesday reportedly called for efforts to speed up war preparations on the second-day session of the regime's year-end key plenary meeting. According to North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency, Kim set forth the militant task for the People's Army and the munitions industry, nuclear weapons and civil defense sectors to further accelerate war preparations. The KCNA also reported that the order comes amid the severe political and military situation on the Korean peninsula, caused by unprecedented acts of confrontation from the U.S. and its followers. The North Korean leader also vowed to expand and develop strategic cooperation with the anti-imperialist independent countries. Pundits say this could mean that Pyongyang could further strengthen ties with countries such as Russia. Kim is also expected to issue a key message at the ongoing meeting, including a New Year's Day address. Experts believe he will likely deliver a hostile message aimed at South Korea and the U.S., as well as measures to ramp up military capabilities.
So we can presume that they will continue to develop missiles and to develop all sorts of other defense preparations. And it's very astutely done to be as cost-effective as possible, and particularly to project a larger image.
South Korea's foreign ministry expressed deep regret.
North Korea is probably well aware that it has been squandering its secure resources on strengthening its military capabilities, including nuclear weapons and missiles, making its economy and the livelihoods of its people more difficult.
Regardless, the regime is expected to carry out military provocations from early 2024. The National Intelligence Service predicted Thursday that North Korea is highly likely to engage in provocative actions ahead of South Korea's general election in April, as it did during previous elections in 2016 and 2020. Considering North Korea's past behaviors and recent level of threats, the agency vowed to make efforts to establish early warning and preparedness with relevant ministries. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korea's Supreme Court once again upholds two separate rulings in favor of the Korean victims of wartime forced labor during Japan's 1910 to 1945 colonial rule, ordering Japanese firms to compensate them. The court made similar rulings in separate cases last week. Our Peunji has the details.
In September 1944, Mr. Hong and others were taken to Mitsubishi Heavy Industries munitions factory in Hiroshima and were forced to work in harsh conditions before returning home, after the atomic bombing in the area in August the following year. Since then, they not only endure social and economic difficulties, but also suffer from health issues after being exposed to radiation. In 2013, Mr. Hong, along with other surviving victims and families of the late victims, filed a suit against the Japanese company, demanding compensation of 100 million Korean won, or about $77,000 per person. Another victim of forced labor, Mr. Lee, also filed a suit against a Japanese company called Hitachi Josen in 2015. Lee worked at the firm's shipyard from September 1944. South Korea's Supreme Court on Thursday ruled in favor of these two cases, ordering Mitsubishi and Hitachi to pay between 50 million to 150 million Korean won to each victim. That's about $38,000 to $111,000. Thursday's rulings are the second by the top court since 2018, when it made landmark rulings on separate forced labor cases, ordering 2 Japanese companies to compensate Korean victims, which strained diplomatic relations between Seoul and Tokyo. The top court upheld similar rulings last week, ordering Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Nippon Steel to pay a maximum of 150 million won, or around $115,000 to each victim in compensation. But the Japanese companies are likely to continue refusing to pay, and the Korean government is expected to compensate the victims instead, using funds procured through a public foundation. The plan was announced earlier this year to improve relations with Japan.
In line with the government compensation plan announced in March, we plan to pay the compensation and damages for the delay through the Foundation for Victims of Forced Mobilization by Imperial Japan.
With such a plan already in place and taking into account Japan's continued denial, it's unlikely that the Japanese firms will pay the compensation themselves. Japanese companies have yet to pay the previously ordered compensation, claiming the statute of limitations for the cases has expired. But last week, for the very first time, the court clarified that this would not be allowed. 배은지, Arirang News.
In response to Russia's hinting at countermeasures against South Korea's recent export restrictions, the Korean government says Moscow should also play its part in managing their bilateral relations. An official from Seoul's foreign ministry told this to reporters on Thursday, adding that they briefed Russia about the restrictions beforehand and that necessary communications are ongoing. A day before, Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said Moscow has the right to take measures in response. South Korea added over 600 goods to its export ban list for Russia and Belarus on Tuesday, which include items that could be used for military purposes, such as heavy construction equipment and aircraft components. Today, the opposition-led National Assembly passed 2 contentious special investigation proposals, one over stock manipulation allegations involving First Lady Kim Gun-hee, and the other over a corruption scandal centered around a local development project. President Yoon is expected to use his veto power once again amid rising political tensions. Our Shin Se-byuk reports.
In a unanimous decision on Thursday, the opposition-led National Assembly unilaterally passed 2 contentious special proposals. One of them involves First Lady Kim Gun-hee's alleged role in manipulating stock prices. The presidential office was quick to respond, stating that President Yoon will promptly exercise his right to request reconsideration. Kim has been accused of impacting the share prices of Deutsche Motors, a car dealership from 2009 to 2012. The second investigation focuses on the 5 billion won club related to a corruption scandal in the Daejang-dong development project in Seongnam, south of Seoul. Both proposals were approved in a plenary session where lawmakers from the PPP were absent. These 2 proposals were fast-tracked by the parliament back in April, requiring expedited deliberations and were automatically submitted to Thursday's plenary session in line with the National Assembly Act. During the session, the ruling People Power Party criticized the bills as politically driven, aimed at influencing next year's April general election.
The sole intent of these proposals is to prompt the president to exercise his right of reconsideration, aiming to leverage this for political contention in the upcoming general election.
In contrast, the opposition parties argued that any attempt by the president to exercise his reconsideration right could backfire on the Yoon administration.
If the president tries to scrap these bills using his veto power, the people will no longer tolerate it and will demand the resignation of the Yoon administration.
Should President Yoon use his veto power this time, it would mark his 4th use of such authority, with his most recent one exercised earlier this month to reject the pro-labor Yellow Envelope Bill and 3 amendments related to broadcasting law. If a veto is exercised this time, it is anticipated that the rivalry between the ruling and opposition parties will become more intense in the lead-up to the general election. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
Shifting gears, South Korea's overall industrial output rebounded in November, led by a jump in semiconductors. Also, retail sales saw their biggest increase in 9 months. Our Park Gun-woo explains.
South Korea's overall industrial production last month saw an increase thanks to a jump in manufacturing industry production. According to Statistics Korea on Thursday, total industrial production rose 0.5% on month, a contrast from the month before when it dropped by 1.8%. The growth was mainly attributed to greater output in manufacturing sectors, including semiconductors, which rose by over 3% on month, the highest increase since August. In detail, chip production, particularly DRAM and flash memory chips, saw a jump of 12.8%, recovering from negative figures in October. A Statistics Korea official said greater demand for AI chips, as well as the base effect, was behind the increase. Meanwhile, an official from the finance ministry also spoke in detail about how semiconductors contribute to recovery in the manufacturing industry.
Chip shipments also rose 30%, while inventories fell by 3.8%, meaning the overall chip industry is heading in the right direction of recovery.
He also said the situation is quite positive as inventory has been decreasing for the third straight month, a situation not seen for 13 months. He also said the government is tentatively expecting some $10 billion in terms of chip exports in December, the highest for this year, and the first time in 15 months it would surpass the $10 billion mark. Retail sales, a key gauge of private spending, also soared by 1% in November compared to the month before, thanks to higher automobile sales figures. Statistics Korea said increased consumption during several discount events in November, including the 2023 Korea Sales Festa, contributed to jumps in spending. While sales saw its biggest increase in 9 months, investment decreased once again in November. But the finance ministry said they are expecting investment to rise in the near future, as it normally increases following export figure increases. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
South Korea has had some economic ups and downs this year. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young has a wrap-up of the economy in the year 2023 and what to expect in 2024 through the key numbers.
For South Korea, the year 2023 was not easy on the economic front, but at the same time, it was a year where the country witnessed some positive signs. The first key number is 2%. It's the Bank of Korea's target level of inflation, and as widely expected, one of the economic keywords of 2023 was, of course, inflationary pressure. The Consumer Price Index, a key gauge of inflation, shows signs of slowing in the first half of 2023, with the on-year inflation rate dipping as low as 2.3% in July. But in the following months, inflation increased to 3% level due to higher oil costs and rising prices for some agricultural goods. In efforts to bring inflation down to its target level, South Korea's central bank kept the key interest rate unchanged at 3.5% for its 7th straight meeting. Meanwhile, the U.S. Fed has maintained its rate in the 5.25% to 5.5% range for a third consecutive time. With the Fed hinting at rate cuts for 2024, market watchers also expect possible rate cuts from the Bank of Korea. The key interest rate gap between South Korea and the U.S., which stands at 2 percentage points, will continue to be a factor to keep our eyes on in 2024 based on the monetary policy directions of the two countries. The second key figure is 13 months. South Korea's economic backbone, its exports, have been sluggish amid continued weak global demand for semiconductor chips, as well as a relatively slow reopening in China. However, toward the end of 2023, exports began showing some promising signs. Korea's exports in October saw an on-year rebound for the first time in 13 months, thanks to greater shipments of automobiles and ships. Exports in November remained robust due to a rebound in semiconductor exports after 16 months, along with a rebound in rechargeable batteries and petrochemicals. And even though exports to China continued to decline for the 18th consecutive month, the overall trade balance as of November maintained a surplus for the 6th straight months. The last key figure is 1.4%. With such performances, the OECD, International Monetary Fund, Bank of Korea, and the South Korean government all forecast economic growth for 2023 at 1.4%, while the Asian Development Bank predicts growth of 1.3%. Then what will the South Korean economy look like in 2024? The general consensus among economic pundits is that the country's economy will expand by over 2% in 2024. The estimated figure from the OECD has been revised up to 2.3% from its previous report, with exports likely to pick up with a recovery in chip demand. However, there are various factors that Korea needs to focus on from both at home and from abroad. Key external uncertainties include financial instability due to global inflation and sustained lingering high key interest rates, and geopolitical tensions arising from conflicts like the Israel-Hamas war and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Additionally, concerns involve a deepening economic downturn in China, as well as the pace of recovery in the global chip industry. On the domestic front, high levels of household debt could continue to weigh on private consumption and investment. But hopefully, the nation's strong resilience and the positive signals in 2023 will pave the way for a tangible economic recovery in 2024.
Moving on, the number of foreign tourists visiting South Korea in November marked the second highest number this year. The Korea Tourism Organization says the number reached over 1.11 million last month. That's some 142% increase compared to last year. There have been over 1 million visitors each month since July. Tourists from Japan accounted for the largest proportion with 278,000, the highest monthly figure of Japanese tourists recorded this year. From January to November, the total number of foreign tourists reached over 9.9 million. Now in sports news, the South Korea squad for the upcoming AFC Asian Cup in Qatar has been announced. Jurgen Klinsmann, the South Korean men's national team manager, announced his 26-man squad on Thursday at a press conference. Tottenham Hotspur's Son Heung-min will lead the pack, which includes 12 Europe-based players, including Bayern Munich defender Kim Min-jae, Paris Saint-Germain's Lee Kang-in, and Wolverhampton Wanderers forward Hwang Hee-chan. Eyeing to win its first Asian Cup title in 64 years, South Korea will face Bahrain, Jordan, and Malaysia in the group stage. The tournament will run from January 12th to February 10th. In the medical field, there have long been concerns of the dangers of syringe needles being reused, as well as needle stick injuries from medical staff. But a new medical needle has been developed that changes from solid state to rubber-like upon insertion, which could eliminate the issue of needle reuse as well as reduce needle stick injuries. Our Yoon reports.
This is the latest IV needle with variable stiffness demonstrated on a piece of meat. It goes in like a normal needle but comes out in a soft state. Also tested in an IV drip simulation, the needle softens in water similar to that of body temperature, 37 degrees Celsius. The fluid flows continuously through the needle and showed no signs of leakage. This transformative needle, created by a South Korean research team, is made up of a liquid metal called gallium. In its solid state, gallium has sufficient hardness that enables the puncturing of soft biological tissues. But upon insertion, gallium melts when exposed to body temperature, changing the needle into a soft state like the surrounding tissues.
So what happens in supercooling is that gallium becomes microdroplets and it's hard to be frozen again. About -5 degrees Celsius, that's where the used needle will be solidified again.
Compared to needles made of stainless steel or plastic, the gallium needle is shown to cause less tissue and blood vessel damage in injection sites, as well as less serious inflammation.
This can prevent unethical reuse of syringe needles or needle stick injury accidents for medical staff.
The researchers added that such a form-changing IV needle can open new opportunities for a wide range of applications, particularly in clinical setups. Specifically, it would be in terms of redesigning other medical needles and sharp medical tools to reduce accidental injuries. Yoon, Arirang News.
It is not surprising if your eyes and noses have been stuffy and dry all day due to dusty air conditions. For the first time this winter, the Seoul Metropolitan Government has implemented emergency fine dust reduction measures until 9 p.m. tonight. The operating hours of public workplaces and construction sites become shortened, and a two-day vehicle system for public institutions is implemented. In addition, ultrafine dust will be in full swing until tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Make sure to wear a mask over KF80 when you go out. As for the temperatures, relatively mild winter weather will continue tomorrow. It will rise to 6 degrees in Seoul, surpassing the previous temperatures by 2 to 5 degrees. Morning temperatures in Seoul will start off at -2 degrees. For daily highs, Seoul will get up to 6, Gwangju and Daegu 9 degrees Celsius. On Sunday, the last day of this year, it is possible to have a huge amount of snow in the central inland and mountainous areas of Gangwon-do province. A heavy snow warning could be issued. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. Well, that is all for this newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back at 10 p.m. with the AI headline news. Good night.
Welcome